Good afternoon, everyone. This is Roy with the Business to Business podcast. I want to thank you for joining us. Today we have a special guest. We're going to talk about leadership. Leadership has kind of become a lost art. Just because we get us a big fancy title doesn't translate into true leadership. So for the last 25 years, Dan Edds has been practicing management consulting, working primarily with state and local governments, healthcare, K through 12 education, and higher education, and not-for-profits. He's the author of two books. The first, Transformation Management, and his most recent book, Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership, Cracking the Code of Sustainable Team Performance. His latest book looks at how organizations which consistently perform at very high levels approach the practice of leadership. The result of the research is the conclusion that leadership can be modeled as an organizational system rather than as a person. So, welcome to the show, Dan. So, what motivated you to write another book on leadership?
Well, thanks, Roy, and it's great to be with you. And that's actually a pretty good question because last time I looked, there was 197,000
Wow.
titles on Amazon, and if you look on like Google Books, there's several million. So the world doesn't exactly need another book on leadership. And but in my management consulting work, all too frequently I found this thing going on where we'd come in, we'd do a project. It might be a process improvement project, maybe something around organizational development or revenue enhancement, cost assessments. And we'd do this great work. People would be thrilled, they'd be excited. The staff would be really excited about what we had done. Generally, there's some light at the end of the tunnel out of some of the issues that they're facing. Come back 3 months later, and nothing has happened.
Right.
And the more I got looking at it, the more I realized there was something else going on besides the people.
Right.
And eventually I began to say, there's a system going on here that's actually running the show, as much as the people are.
Right.
So I just got looking at what does that mean? What does it look like? And ended up asking the question, how do organizations that consistently perform at a really high level, how do they approach leadership?
Yeah.
So it came out of that.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. In my consulting practice as well, there's nothing more disheartening to return to a client a few months later and have to knock dust off of the awesome action plan that you provided
Right.
them. So,
Right.
So what kind of organizations did you look at doing your research?
Well, I started out actually looking at healthcare because the first time that I actually helped an organization design an intentional system of leadership happened to be a small rural hospital.
Okay.
And so that's where I started looking was healthcare. It was also a place that was fairly easy to get data. Healthcare results and healthcare data tends to be very public. So it was pretty easy to get the data. But then I morphed into looking at manufacturing organizations. I looked at education and had some incredible interviews with actually two gentlemen. One was a full colonel in the United States Army, and the other one was a 4-star general who went on to be a member of the Clinton administration.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And the more I looked, the more I discovered. Ended up actually having a conversation with one of the senior coaches of an NFL Super Bowl champion. And the more I looked, the more I talked, and the more I learned. And so it ended up being a pretty broad spectrum of organizations.
Okay. So you mentioned, and kind of in the lead in, I was talking, and I may have spoke a little out of turn for this particular show, but we talk about the leadership, and you mentioned that it's not a person. Can you explain that? Because we typically think of our, manager or CEO, the C-suite people as the leadership team.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's pretty standard. But the question that I began to look at and study was, how does that leadership team, how do they function?
Right.
And do they have a consistent way of practicing leadership from the CEO all the way down to the first emerging leader, incoming manager on their first job, management role?
Right.
And what I found was these really elite level organizations, they don't treat leadership. The analogy I use is they don't treat high performing organizations treat leadership more like a symphony,
Okay.
as opposed to a collection of solo acts.
Okay, that's a good.
And what they're really doing is saying, in this organization, there's a common way that we do leadership. There's a common way that we exercise the power and the authority and the influence of leaders and managers. And by the way, if you don't want to do it this way, let us know and we'll bless you as you leave.
Right. Yeah, sometimes we're not, unfortunately, sometimes we're not quick enough to get to that point that if you don't want to get in with our philosophy of management, because you get that one person, it's like a virus. It becomes very catching, and it can disrupt an entire organization. So,
Yep.
And not. It's a whole nother show episode we won't get into, but that gets back to really doing your due diligence on hiring to make sure you put the right people in the right seat to begin with, so we don't come up with those problems.
Yeah, it's sort of like a football coach that we had out here in Washington for a while. He was fond of saying, "Our kind of guy."
Right.
We want to bring players in who are our kind of guy, and that wasn't just it wasn't just the personality traits or character of the player, but it was really, will this player be able to fit in and be coachable to our system of how we want to play football?
Right.
And that's what I saw consistently in these organizations that just perform at a high level year in, year out, even across multiple generational differences of leadership. New CEO comes in and they just keep right on going.
Right.
And it really came down to, we have a system, a way that we're going to do leadership, and everybody is expected to do it this way.
Right. Well, and that's the way, I talk also a lot about processes and procedures, and this kind of falls into that as well, is that while we don't want to lose key people in an organization for, if they're good performers and good for our team, good for the culture, we never want to lose them. But the reality is people retire, go, start their own businesses. There's a lot of reasons. It doesn't always have to be negative. Right. But if our leadership is more systematic, then we don't have a breakdown during this transition. We can usually bring in that new person and just keep moving. Is that correct?
Exactly, and that actually is a very good word. If our leadership is systematic, then we can coach and train every new leader, new manager, emerging leader into that system.
Right.
And there's two really benefits of that. One, the organization benefits, because everything is seamless. It's systematic. But the emerging leader also benefits because now they know what they're supposed to do.
Right.
I had one of them. I knew that I was really onto something when, again, I was working with a small rural hospital, and at the end of a 9-month-long project, we had the basic core of a system outlined, detailed. It was graphical. We had it all placed up on a wall, and the chief nurser, who had been with the organization for probably 15, 20 years, this is exactly what she does. She goes like this, leans back in her chair, and she looks at all of this visual graphics we've got on the wall. She says, I've always been promoted because I was a good nurse. And then you all put this title of leader on me, and I didn't have a clue what I was supposed to do.
Right.
She said, and she points to the wall and she said, that tells me what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, and that's another great point. Is I work in my younger days. I worked for a very large corporation, and our system of promoting people were battlefield promotions. Either you'd been here the longest, or we thought you were the best technician that we had. Neither one of
Exactly.
those translate into being a good, a good leader. So I think we have to look at that
Exactly.
as we promote people through our ranks. There needs to be
Yep.
longevity is not necessarily a trait of leadership. So,
Right.
speaking of that, does the idea of the systematic leadership, does that negate the impact that individuals have on an organization?
No, it doesn't really, but in fact, it enhances it. Um, so I mentioned one of the people I interviewed was a retired 4-star general, and by any measure, this guy is a fabulous leader. I mean, he's literally led men into combat. He knows what leadership is all about. And he told me a story about Norman Schwarzkopf, the supreme commander of the First Gulf War.
Yeah.
And and as he was telling me this story, and in his relationship with General Schwarzkopf, what struck me was that both of these guys are have enormous leadership skills just inbred in them. I mean, they were just sort of bred to be a leader. But when they were put into a system called the United States Army, they absolutely flourished, and that's one of the attributes of a system. A system will always take the skills, the talent that's already there,
Right.
and leverage it. In fact, that's why the book is called Leveraging the Genetics of Leadership, because it will take what's already there and leverage it. And it's the same thing that a sports team does. If you take the same two teams, the same caliber of talent on both teams, but you take one team and put them into an exquisitely designed system, 9 times out of 10, they're going to win the game.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not even I won't mention the hometown team where I'm at, but, because we have a lot of marquee players. We have a lot of standout talented individuals, but, the talk is that is kind of what is lacking is leadership, because you can look around at other teams that have a collection of, maybe they're good. They're not going to say they're average, but they're better than average players. But because they have a great system, they can actually win. And
Exactly.
it's kind of interesting because that was brought. I don't want to digress into sports talk all of a sudden, but I was just going to say, that question was brought up on a sports talk radio. Asked the owner of the team, and he obviously it struck a nerve that he's heard this before, because he told the guy to shut up on the air, and so it made big news. But I think I think that just goes to the point. The business is the same as sports. It's like,
Yep.
we're trying to get a collection of individuals to all pull the wagon in the same direction.
Yep.
And it's
One of the stories, actually it's a story that I start out with in the book, is and to your point, is with my son. So my son was in the 6th grade, and he decided he wanted to try out for the school basketball team. The reality was that the idea of a tryout was a bit of a stretch, because he went to this little dinky tiny school that was so small. If they could just field a team, they'd be doing good.
right.
So, essentially any boy who wanted to play basketball got to play. And their coach was just a young guy himself. He had just got out of college, and he liked kids, and he was doing some youth work, and he needed some extra money to keep his schooling going. But he wasn't an experienced coach, but he knew how to design a system of how to play the game of basketball unselfishly.
Right.
And as much as I would love to say the first year this team won their league championship, the reality is that they lost every game.
Yeah.
Second year they did a little bit better, but he kept working with them in how to play the game of basketball according to his system, which is to produce unselfish team play. The third year they went undefeated.
Yeah.
And
it's an important part, because as a hiring manager, sometimes we get into the rut of, of course we want to seek out good individuals, but we think that we hire one standout individual in one position is going to change the course of the company. And
Right.
I think the point that you're making is so awesome, is that, we have to, even in business, we win as a team, we lose as a team. So if we're struggling in business, it's because we're not all pulling the same direction, and we have to develop that support. Even the standout individuals need support for the company to be successful.
Yeah. Well, I love the quote by Deming when he said, "A bad system will beat a good person every time."
Right.
So the flip side of that is, well, if a bad system will beat a good person, what happens when you have a good system?
Right. Right.
Now you just exponentially leverage the value of good people.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up Deming, because the very large corporation that I worked for in my youth, we actually adopted the Deming method probably around the 90s. We went through a corporate breakup into smaller companies, and so, we operated as a huge monopoly, and so, while we were worried about the bottom line, it wasn't the end all be all. But when we all became smaller public companies, then all of a sudden, profits came first. And so it's an interesting, if you haven't, for those who have never read Deming, it's, if I remember the story correctly, I think he worked for AT&T or Bell Labs, and then they kind of rebuked him, and he went to China and kind of saved a lot of the Chinese industry. Japan.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
went to Japan. He couldn't get anybody here in the States to listen to him.
Yeah.
So he went to Japan.
Yeah, and I think it's it's just in time inventory and some basically do it right the first time type theory. But anyway, kind of a side note, it's a great. It's still timely. I mean, I think he did this back in the 60s and 70s, but it's still very timely information.
Absolutely.
So, when we're talking about systematic leadership, I think the other thing that I just thought of is that, a lot of times when we start a business, we, it's just us or maybe one or two people. We don't want to get bogged down in things. And then all of a sudden, in 5 years from now, we look back and we wake up one morning and now we've got 25 or 30 people working for us. We're struggling, and now it's like, now we need to implement something. So what is your opinion on, it's really never too early to start the systematic leadership?
Yeah, great question. No, in fact, one of my first interviews in researching the book was with a young man at the time the story took place. He was like 34 years old, and he had been promoted to a leadership position within the largest. It was actually one of the largest engineering firms in the world, 19,000 employees, and so they gave him this promotion, and then he got panicked because he realized now he's a leader.
Right.
And he's leading teams geographically dispersed, and he's leading teams who have different skill sets, and he's leading teams who are attacking different markets. And as he explained to me, he said, I was pretty good at managing projects, but now they put this thing of leader on me. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And of course, I said, so did the company send you off to leadership training school for a month? And I mean, he's an engineer, which means he gets serious about everything.
Right.
And his eyes got big. He said, no, they didn't give me anything. But so what he did do, though, was what he did as an engineer, which was he designed a system of leadership. It was beautiful. And within 3 years, he was given this. He was one of 300 managing this company of 19,000 people, and he was the youngest. He says, Dan, he says, I'm the youngest of these 300. The next oldest is 10 years older than I am. But the crazy thing is, they're all asking me how to lead.
Right.
And so, it's never too soon, never too early. I would tell an emerging leader, listen, if your company doesn't give you some instruction of how to lead, you know, pick up my book, or think about leadership as a system and how you are going to lead in a systematic way. And I would tell, someone who, one of my case studies is with an elementary school principal with 75 educational leaders that she's responsible for. I would tell her, and she did actually, the exact same thing. Think about leadership as a system, and if you had to design it as a system, what would that look like? And that works for the individual. It works for the emerging leader. And by the way, it works for the United States Army with 2 million active and reserve, soldiers. So it can work for an organization of any size.
Yeah, and so, it's interesting you bring up the school. So how does this work if you're let's just say you're in a larger, we'll just use the school as an example. You're in a larger school district that's got really no policy. If you create this at your campus level, let's say, do you get pushback from the higher ups, or as long as they're functioning well, they really don't care? And it's not only just the school districts. I'm thinking about, larger organizations that maybe me as a manager, my company's not doing it. So what I do is I implement it for my team. How does that integration work?
That's a great question, because I hear two things, two sides of that question. One side is, this person is an innovator. They're doing a great job. They're a turnaround artist.
Yeah.
And they get that reputation. The other side is, hey, wait a minute, this person is making the rest of us look bad.
Right.
And to the point where you may get actually moved out of the organization because literally you are making everybody else look bad.
Right. And the way I would take that is, if you get moved out of the organization, it's probably not an organization that you really want to be a part of anyway.
Very true. Yeah. Very, very, very true. Yeah. So with the example of an educator, so one of the case studies I have is of a woman who was given her first job as a principal of an elementary school, and it was not an easy school. It was the trade language. It was a high percentage of free and reduced lunch students, which is a nice way of saying high poverty, low academic achievement, et cetera.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And when I told her, I said, I want to ask you about your approach to leadership, she literally looked at me and said, I don't know anything about leadership. She went on and then to explain the most exquisite and detailed system of leadership I found possibly outside the United States Army.
Oh, wow.
But what she started with, though, was so finally I said, so if there are one or two words that would describe your approach to leadership, what would they be? And without a beat, she said, well, this won't be very popular, but love and grace. And I'm thinking, okay, yeah, that's cool. That's nice. I like the idea that, elementary school kids had a principal that loved them.
Yes.
And she read my mind. She said, I know what you're thinking, and that's not the way I'm using those words.
Right.
She said, to me, love and grace means I could have conversations with my staff that are difficult, but do it in a spirit of love and grace.
Right.
Actually, you just said a spirit of love.
Yeah.
She said, and I can push people beyond what they think they're capable of producing, but do it in a spirit of love.
Right.
And then she went on to describe how she really uses the values of love and grace to create a culture of collaboration. She wanted her staff to feel like they were valued and appreciated and loved.
Right.
But she really wanted her staff to collaborate together.
Right. Right.
And so she went on and explained, like I said, an exquisite system of leadership to produce collaboration, but with an total experience for her workforce of love and grace, of love.
Yeah.
And the funny thing was, she didn't mention the word grace until the very end of the conversation. And finally I said, okay, so you've talked about love and collaboration. Where does grace come in? And she does this. She pulls back the sleeve of her blouse. She has the word grace tattooed right here on her wrist.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, this is interesting.
Right.
She said, this is how we do innovation. And that was like the last question I had for her was, how do you do innovation?
Right,
and she
right.
brought it up. And she said, it takes 10 years for a good idea to get out of the halls of academia into the classroom.
Wow.
She said, that's too long.
Yeah.
When we have the lives of young people at stake, that's too much time.
Right.
And so she says, I want my staff to feel like they have the liberty and the freedom intelligently to innovate. And she said, in the classroom, innovation is hard because if a teacher spent 2 weeks teaching math in a way that's innovative and it doesn't work, that's 2 weeks that's gone. You can't replace it.
Right.
That's 2 weeks of instruction that cannot be replaced. So she said, sometimes our great ideas work and other times they don't. And that's when we need to have the ability, I need to have the ability to still support my staff.
Right.
And she said, we also need to have the ability to forgive ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
And as she does that, she says, teachers are passionate about education. And she points out to Kleenex boxes that are strategically placed around her office.
Yeah. Right. Right. No, and that's a good point. We have to be flexible. If we're ever going to try anything new, we got to realize that mistakes are going to be made, and we can't discourage innovation by crucifying those that try new things that fail. I mean, anyway, we don't. Nobody really wants to fail, but it's just part of the trial and error, unfortunately.
Yep.
So, and I think that's interesting because, as a young manager. We didn't think of it in terms of love, but we were a bunch of dudes out there. So but it's more, I think too, that trust, you build the trust because I had 12 individuals that operated as individuals. They didn't check on each other during the day, make sure everything was going good. But once they begin to trust you and work as a team, worry about each other, then we began to be successful together. So I think that's awesome advice for anybody. So, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, this teacher, she did something that could have been very, very dangerous. So one of the truisms about a system is that systems operate on rules and routines.
Mm-hmm.
She initiated a new routine that could have been dangerous. Most teachers in the country, they have to go through some kind of an annual evaluation, observation, and it's a pretty stressful time for anybody. But she said she concluded that wasn't good enough to enhance a value and an experience of collaboration. So she installed something called peer review, and she said, that could have gotten me in trouble with the union. In fact, the union could have come in and shut it down in a heartbeat. But she said they didn't because we had developed this culture of trust, of collaboration, of love and grace.
Yeah.
And she said my staff and the union, we had developed enough of a relationship that they trusted me, that I wasn't going to use it against them.
Right.
And it was all about collaboration and improving the performance in the classroom. Yeah. And she said because of that, nobody kicked back to her at all.
Yeah. And that's another thing. The metrics that we use to measure employees, they should be, we should use them for good and development and to better the process, not as a giant stick to, beat people with. And unfortunately, sometimes it's like, we develop good metrics. We then use it as a tool to beat people up with, and then they find a way to skirt the system. So then our metrics are basically worthless to us anyway. So.
Well, that's a great observation. One of the things that I learned it was really startling. I mean, it was a real aha moment as I was doing this research. was these organizations that perform, again, consistently at a very high level. I think they put more emphasis on measurement of the individual leader, and actually they measure the leader against what's really important, which most of the time is the engagement level of their staff.
Yeah.
And so one of my case studies is actually a hospital down in your neck of the woods in Abilene, and another one was in Mississippi. And I saw various versions of the same thing, where they actually measure individual managers against levels of engagement of their staff.
Oh, wow.
And their specific targets. If they are within a range, then that's good.
Yeah.
If they would fall below that range, they would bring in a coach or a mentor to work with that manager on an individual basis of helping them to achieve essentially a better relationship with their staff.
Yeah.
And to capture more of that engagement, that psychological and emotional commitment from their staff.
Yeah.
And if they fell below a certain threshold, either some kind of an organizational review was triggered, or they would just say, okay, we're gonna put you into a different role.
Yeah.
And most of the time, that person would take themselves out of that leadership role because they realized they just weren't made for it.
Right. Yeah, and there's no shame in that. I think that's the other thing is, people look at that as a personal failure, and it's really not. I mean, if you're good at writing, if you're good at math, if you're good at teaching, that doesn't always mean that you're going to be able to be, a manager, a principal, a supervisor, whatever the leadership position is. So we need to focus on our talents and really expand. Now, not that we probably can't study on our own or observe other people to become a good leader, but sometimes it's not. There are natural leaders, and some of us we have to work really hard at it.
Yep.
Yep. So, are there any other differences in the organizations that you see that operate under the designed leadership system? Are there any other things that really stand out, and do you have some examples?
Yeah, actually, there's so to explain that whole concept in fully is probably a 2-day workshop. So
okay,
I'll try to do it in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
But there's two things that are just sort of the big ahas. One, I already made reference to it. One is that these really high performing organizations, they intentionally design or identify an experience for the workforce. Okay. And they coach, teach, train every leader and every manager how to produce that system or how to produce that experience. And it's different for every organization, but I found organizations that essentially said, we want our workforce to have an experience of respect. Mm-hmm. And everything, how they operate, and this was another healthcare organization, how they delivered care to their patients, how they interacted with their workforce, how they structured and managed the workflows was all based on that core value and experience of respect. So if you're working for that organization, you could walk into that organization and know that your voice would be valued, would be respected. You know that if you were a medical assistant just coming out of school, that you would be respected, that even the chief medical officer would treat you respectfully.
Right.
I found another organization that is driven off of value of relationship. Happened to be a Native American healthcare organization in Alaska. They chose relationship because culturally it is ingrained in their culture. Yeah. The value of relationship. But the other thing that really struck me was these organizations, once they identify this overarching value experience for the workforce and start driving everything off of that, someplace in there, they become just fanatics about value. Yeah. And it really starts with, again, it's the way they approach people. As you probably have seen, most organizations look at people as an asset that has to be managed, which is a nice way of saying control.
Right. Yes.
these organizations that have designed systems of leadership and that are performing at a really high level, they see people not as an asset to be managed, but as a resource to be developed. And what really struck me was their emphasis on developing the whole person, not just the technical skills.
Right.
They actually wanted to see their people become stronger, more self-confident, more empowered at a personal level,
Right.
as much as within the organization. Because they realize that a person, a human being, has unimaginable creativity and innovation just in their DNA. And it walks in their door every morning at 8 o'clock, and it doesn't cost the organization a penny more. And so by understanding that their people represent a resource that can be developed, what they do, they end up creating better human beings, and the value of that creative process, where does it go? It gets passed on to their customer.
Right. Right.
And actually, when I saw that, I had been trading emails with a woman by the name of Dr. Barbara Kellerman at Harvard University. And when I saw this in this one healthcare organization, I was so blown away by it that I thought, she's going to understand what I'm seeing. And so I made an appointment to talk with her on the phone, and pleasantly, she agreed immediately. And so I told her what I had seen, and she says, I know exactly what you're talking about. And she said, you need to read, 5 of these books, all of which were terrific. But it actually, what her counsel actually helped me structure the second section of the whole book. So let me give you one example.
Okay.
So one of the case studies is with a small manufacturing company. The name of it is Cass Taylor. They design and manufacture custom commercial furniture. And if you want to do business with them, you need to get in line because they are as picky about their customers as they are about their furniture.
Oh, wow, nice.
And they literally can pick and choose the customers that they want because they deliver so much value.
Right.
In the relationship that customers are literally waiting in line to do business with them.
Wow, nice problem to have.
And nice problem to have. And I had a tour, and then I had a couple interviews with them. And during the tour, at the end of the tour, I said, so is there any overriding philosophy, principle, way you approach leadership? And a guy named Todd, who was the production manager, stands up, walks over towards me. He's kind of a big, tall guy. I'm sitting down in this chair, and he looks down at me. He says, we practice servant leadership. And, his body language was stunning. But what they do, they use servant leadership as the methodology for engaging every member of their workforce to find and eliminate waste in their workflows and work processes.
Right.
But one of the things that was so fascinating to me was how they look at their people. They see their people, 200 employees, as the front line, essentially the front line warriors in the battle for waste. And they coach, train, and mentor every member of their workforce, not only to identify waste, but when they do see an opportunity to improve a system, to improve a work process, how to actually see and implement the solution. So, in a manufacturing or almost any environment, there are certain titles that we use. So-and-so is my boss, they're my manager, they're my production lead, they're my CEO, they're whatever. In this organization, they've dropped all of those titles, and they use the word mentor. So if you are my supervisor, I don't refer to you as my supervisor, nor do you think of yourself as my supervisor. I think of you as my mentor, and you think of yourself as my mentor. So you're mentoring me if I see an opportunity to extract waste out of the system.
Right.
Your job is to mentor me in how to actually find a solution and implement it. Your job is not to do it for me, but it's to
Right.
coach me and mentor me through the process. By the way, if I see an opportunity to improve something in my house, they'll coach me on how to do a Kaizen, which is the Japanese term for, improvement. They'll coach me how to do it in my own home. And by the way, I will get paid time off if I do a Kaizen in my house
Oh, wow.
or on the company.
Interesting.
So I heard one funny story. This one guy, he had been with the company for a while, and he was he's probably mid-30s. Tells me this funny story of, he thought he was going to do his very pregnant wife a favor by reorganizing her kitchen pantry. And so he went to his mentor and said, here's my Kaizen, here's what I'm going to do. And his mentor coached him through the process of how to do that according to how they wanted Kaizen to be implemented. So he did that, and he got his paid time off. Unfortunately, his very pregnant wife wasn't so thrilled
Right. Yeah.
that he reorganized her kitchen pantry.
Yeah. Now she's having to ask him where everything is, probably.
Exactly. But the point is, they want Kaizen to be so inbred into how they function,
Right.
that they want it to be second nature. I heard a story of how one of their leaders had a sailboat, did a Kaizen on reorganizing their sailboat, and still got credit for it.
Wow. That's an awesome mindset, though, because it really does need to be a life outlook, whether it's your business, personal life, and, we learn things in our personal life that translate well to business
Absolutely.
as well. So if we figure out how
Absolutely.
to solve this problem here, we can take that to work and solve problems. I love that. That's great.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
And, mentors, that's one thing that I always recommend, in that new hire process is, we hire a person and just kind of dump them out there. So, the idea of having a lifelong or company employment long mentor in the company, that's great thinking. That's very forward.
Yeah. I thought it was brilliant. I was in the tour. There was a woman who hadn't been in the company very long. She was explaining how she was cutting, big pieces of foam core material into smaller pieces for, parts for furniture.
Yeah.
And she had identified a way of getting 5 parts where they had been getting 4 parts out of the same amount of core material.
Wow.
So, she's describing this story. She says, I went to my mentor, and my mentor walked me through the process, and my mentor said this, and I'm thinking, who in the heck is her mentor? But there was this little lady standing right next to her, who was very quiet, hadn't said a word. And finally, so, out of exasperation or something, I said, so is this lady your boss? And she looked at me like I was from outer space, and she says, we just call them mentors.
Oh, that's great.
But it's a great word that describes the relationship
Right.
between the various hierarchies within the organization.
Yeah. That's awesome. It's a great story. Dan, we appreciate you taking time out of your day to be with us. Before I let you go, a couple closing questions, though. First off, what is a tool in your either in your business life or personal life, a tool, ritual, habit that you just can't do without every day?
Oh, boy. Great question. Well, I could say my computer.
Right. With all these virtual meetings nowadays, right? We couldn't make it without it.
Yeah. But, if there was one thing, I don't always do it, but when I do it, my day always goes better. And that's always having a quiet time in the morning of reflection.
Okay.
When I do that, and every bone in my body is saying, Dan, get going. It's time to get going, get working. Turn on your computer,
right.
Start reading your email. But when I do that, it's amazing how much more work I get done. I'm 10 times calmer. throughout the day. And the day always just seems to be more productive.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and I hear that more and more in these trying times, is practicing gratitude and reflection and just being thankful. Of course, the big things are health and all that, but we can also kind of relish in those small victories that we have every day.
Sure.
So, yeah, I think
Sure.
that's great. Well, so if somebody wants to pick up a copy of your book or reach out and chat with you more, tell everybody how they can best do that.
Well, the best way is through my website, danieledds.com. The hardcover cover of the book is available through my website. It will be available. The electronic version will be available on Amazon within probably the next 3 or 4 days. And it will also be available on Apple Books and Barnes and Noble and all of the other bookstores as well, the electronic version. And eventually the hardcover book will be on Amazon and everybody else as well.
Okay, awesome.
And I'm very frank. If any of your listeners would like to call me and just say, hey, I heard what you talked about. It's an interesting idea and want to just chat about it. My number's on the website. They could send me an email and would relish that opportunity.
All right. Well, again, thanks so much for taking time out of your day today, and I appreciate all the listeners as well. This is Roy with the Business of Business podcast. You can always find us at www.thebusinessofbusinesspodcast.com. We're also on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google Play, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We're all over the place. So get out there, check us out, and be sure and share this episode with other people and other organizations. I think this is definitely a message that everybody needs to hear. Going through these times, especially now, is really a good time to take some internal looks, and let's come out with better systematic leadership processes on the other side of this. So, all right.
Love it. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks a lot. See you next time, Dan.
Thank you, Roy.